Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. This will be part 2 of the new series, Boy Interrupted, discussing my involuntary admission to a psychiatric hospital over 30 years ago and the various situations I experienced. Today's focus will be on the system they used there, my diagnosis, and an introduction to a cast of some of the characters that I encountered there. The place was called Two Rivers. I'm able to state this safely because the place is gone. According to reports, they had a history of mistreating patients and doing unorthodox things, which has no effect on my particular story. The system they used for the monitoring of behavior, they had what they called a point sheet. I don't recall exactly how it worked. It was something like every 2 hours, whoever was leading the group at that time would give everyone a score. So if you were good all day, you'd get like 5 points with tally marks. If you did something bad or disruptive, then you'd get 0 or you'd get 3 or just a lower number. So you're basically in China. It's a scoring system. If you do something horrific, which I happen to have done, at least in their eyes, on more than one occasion, their typical response is,
"Give me your point sheet."
So they can put a 0 on it. They're tyrants. That's the way this was designed. It's supposed to be a structured environment and to keep everyone acting correctly. The diagnosis, I asked, like, so what's my diagnosis, doctor? I was told it was manic depression, which would be called bipolar disorder today. They were giving me lithium pills, which I took. I took it for a few years, but then later just stopped because I didn't think it was necessary. Next, I'll be discussing some of the cast of characters that I met in this institution. As you heard in the first video, how I was brought there under false pretenses, thinking it was just a normal visit to the family psychologist, just at a different location. Well, when I was brought in there and tricked into being forced into the program, I was devastated because I knew I had a school life going, and here this just didn't fit with any reality I knew. I can't be in here for 3 days when Monday's coming up and I have to go to school and all this. I learned eventually that I was being treated like a pregnant girl who was in high school at home and had a homebound teacher who would bring my assignments. He'd show up, and luckily he was an okay guy at the school. There were lots of witches there. This person was okay. And he would bring my assignments, and I would find carefully tucked notes from other students that knew my situation, and they were writing illegally because I wasn't supposed to have such mail. I was taken to a room. It was a room with 2 beds, and this boy was in there. I just looked at him, and he said, "Hi, how are you?" And he was friendly, and I was just saying, I can't believe I was brought here. I'm forced to stay in this place 72 hours to begin with, can't even leave the area. And he sat there and acted sympathetic, like he understood. We started talking about where you go to high school. And then all of a sudden I realized he went to a high school that contained friends that I'd made over the years. I brought their names up and he knew some of them. It was a great feeling. This progressed on, and we continued talking. And apparently he could sense my devastation. And he was saying, well, if you want, when we go to dinner, I could trip the fire alarm. That can get the door open and you can run out. And I thought, well, that sounds nice, but I was a teen living at home and didn't really have any other home to go to, so I was like, never mind, don't bother. Well, that evening, talk continued, and somehow a bottle of lotion was nearby, and this boy was being friendly and kind of flirtatious. I was in this weird place, and I wasn't really thinking of anything like that, but here this boy was coming on to me, so I thought, okay, what do I do? So I went along with it. And when nighttime came, somehow that bottle of lotion was in his hands being rubbed on me, on my back. I allowed it because, again, I was completely out of sorts. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't understand why I was in this place because nothing happened. I told you before, there was no murder, there was no horrible theft or some criminal behavior or beating or anything. It was just a surprise. It turns out at night, they had these guards that shine flashlights to the ceiling, and they would like walk down the hall and go in each room, stick their nose in, and then walk out. Well, that was kind of daring at that point, because the boy ended up in my bed with this lotion, rubbing it on, and he'd jump and run back to his bed. I'd lay down and put my head down and act like I was asleep. And it would happen repeatedly, and this guard kept coming. It was just a crazy night. Nothing sickening happened, and what can you do? There's someone coming in every few minutes. It's the very next day, strangely enough, One of the doctors had said,
Oh, TJ, we've decided that you're going to be in a room by yourself. With your disorders, yours and the other person's, it's not a good idea for you to room together.
I thought, great. They must have figured out something was going on. And at this time, I had dyed black hair, and they had these stupid rule lists. On mine, it said something like, no makeup. Because typically when I had the black dyed hair, I would put some black makeup right here, and right there, and here, to kind of go with it. But that was forbidden, because makeup is such an evil thing. So the funny thing was, we had these baskets with our toiletries that we kept in a special locked area, and in the mornings we would go get them. I was in jail, but I would bring mine back, and one of the counselor ladies was there, and she saw in my basket what looked like a compact, which was a compact, but it was one of my mother's that had no powder or makeup in it. It was just a simple mirror, because I used to hold it up and look at the back of the head to make sure everything was in place. It had nothing to do with makeup, but she said, and I said, well, honey, there ain't no makeup in it, look, and I had to show it to her. I'd shower in some weird shower alone. It was more fun, I think, with the boy there because at least there was someone else to share the experience with. But eventually I began to meet a cast of characters. There was an activity called occupational therapy, and we did crafts in this. And there was this one particular girl who was goofy. And the counselor lady was real prim and proper, who was in charge of the occupational therapy and was giving us instructions. Well, this particular girl was ripping at her flesh, and the lady said, what are you doing? And the girl said,
I like to tear the flesh off my fingernails and eat it.
and this lady was like, oh my goodness, you don't want to do that. And it was just funny. I just found entertainment in that. There was another girl who was kind of funny. After my 72 hours being stuck in that area, I was allowed to go with the group to the cafeteria. She would sit there before a big, huge plate of French fries and this red container of ketchup, and she'd squirt it all over and said, this is me once a month. And I watched one of the older residents hear her and do this and turn, and I just laughed at that too, because like, what, this is a madhouse here. There were also some younger children there, one of which I conflicted with without it knowing, because there was some rule in my rules of hold mail for parents. I had a network on the outside that knew I was there. I even had one boy that looked through the phone book and looked through all of the names, mine, to find my father's name so he could call in and pretend to be him, just so I could speak with him on the payphone, which I did. It was crazy because that very same evening, within minutes of me hanging up, my parents actually showed up, so they'd kind of think it was funny because we didn't have cell phones back then.
Oh, you're talking to your father, but he's here?
I got away with that somehow. But one particular time, I was looking at the counter when the lady was away, and I saw my name on an envelope, mail, for me. But there was another note across the top of it that said, hold for parents. And I had thought, hold for parents, my ass. So I happened to have a project for one of my art classes that was a long kite stick, and I took that and like fished it on over and grabbed it. The sad part was there was also a letter included, which was to a little boy that was on the other side, in the juvenile area. I ended up having to take his, and I couldn't really give it to him because if I gave it to him, that would indicate I stole it. If I stole it, I'd be in trouble, so I just had to put it aside. But that's something I kind of felt guilt for because I couldn't really do anything about it, and I thought maybe later I would, but didn't. I'd gotten to know a few of the kids and spoken to them. One night, this girl came in screaming. She was shrieking, and she had her arms in a straitjacket like this, and she was cussing, saying bad words. It was kind of entertaining. It was like watching a movie, and this girl, we just thought she was crazy. Like a day later, she calmed down, and we were like talking to her, like what's going on, and became her friend. And it's very interesting in this environment how we all seem to become friends. Now, there were some that were closer than others. We were all basically in a desperate situation. I remember by the time I left, some of the people were crying there, which I thought was kind of sweet. And we thought, well, we're going to keep in touch after this. Funny thing is, we really didn't. Another interesting person I met was this boy. But I was drawn to him for some reason and was talking to him regularly. And I got a feeling, that intuition you're supposed to trust, just something about him I knew, and I just didn't know what it was. He seemed like somebody I would have known when I was really young. And so I'd asked questions like, well,
Where did you go to grade school?
And he gave the name of this school, which didn't ring any bells, and I figured, oh, well, I guess this is one of those instances when my intuition's off. But then I thought about it more. I said, are you sure that's the name of your school? Because I went to such and such school. And then his face lit up, and he's like, that was the name of it. I'd gotten the name wrong. He had given me the wrong school names, so I figured I just was mistaken. Turns out it was a boy that I used to live nearby. I wasn't his best friend, I didn't hang out with him all the time, but I did used to go to his home, and I would bring up specific details I remembered then. He would corroborate them, and it was actually a wonderful thing to think, wow, a kid that I knew way back then that just disappeared, we didn't have Facebook. And here he is in the same place I'm at, rotting in this prison. But it was very interesting. We had these journals that we wrote in, and I made this thing up with him. I said, hey, why don't you tell me your life story and I'll tell you mine, and we'll trade journals. So we did, and it was actually interesting and fun. The shameful thing is, I don't know where he is today. I didn't keep in touch with him or anyone else from there. I did run into one or two in public, but that was about it. One particular evening I do specifically recall going to my room for free time, which is designed for you to study or to read or to just relax or rest. I was still fairly new. When I got in the room, I noticed how it had a desk, 2 dressers, all bolted to the wall and the floor so you couldn't move them. For some strange reason, I felt the need to step inside of one of these things. It was a huge dresser type thing, so I got into it and just sat down there, just wanting some dark, quiet time for a moment. During this period, one of the witches that worked there decided to come in and do the knock, 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 and then open the door and come in my room. And, well, I wasn't expecting anyone. I didn't request her presence. It was some kind of who knows what visit, but I wasn't prepared for it. So I just sat there for a second, still. A moment later, I heard my name being called, so I just lightly opened the closet door, and she went like this.
Give me your sheet.
And she wrote down, hiding in closet and trying to scare me, which is ridiculous because I didn't even know she was coming in the room. She just snuck in and let herself in. So I hadn't intentionally hidden to scare her as if I knew she was coming. But regardless, I had to take the punishment. So she gave me a 0 on the point sheet for that period, which I felt was unjustified. But what can you do?
It is me, the narcopath of your wildest dreams, here to give you a few more confessions.
I realized that you said you didn't want to get serious with anybody, but that wasn't going to stop me. I was already planning for our families to get together. I have a brother who is just about as narcopathic as I am, and he can spot the good ones and the bad ones and the vulnerable ones. That's why I wanted to get our families together. And of course it would give me, trailer trash of the world, the chance to impress your family because they were well-to-do. They were better off than my family. I wanted to impress them and told them all kinds of lies, and they bought them. Or maybe they were just being polite. But I told them about how smart I was and how brilliant I am in school and how talented I am artistically. I tried not to make it sound like bragging. I just tried to make it subtle. You heard. Even though later you asked me about some of the stuff I said and I told you I have no idea because I made it all up. I studied it from a book. How to Look Important and Educated. I cheated my way through school. I'm stupid as a box of rocks. So I had to pretend to try to get on your family's good side because if I did that, then I know once I started mistreating you and you went to them, I'd already have given your father a wink and your mother a lick. And they'd be on my side. They'd turn against you before they would turn against me. And yes, we might as well talk about the spider incident, because I know that you knew, but I couldn't tell you then. When your family was gracious enough to invite me to stay with you all in your cabin together, I jumped at the chance. But you remember that incident with the shrieking? I try to get the fathers. I love them. They have the most money. They usually find some reason to keep me around. I deliberately was in the bathroom nude, screaming hysterically because I saw a spider on the wall. I ain't afraid of a spider, but it was the perfect prop and it was a sign from the devil for me to act. I knew your daddy would come running, and he did, and he saw me in nude completely. Oh, teats out everywhere. My Virginia was wide open, and I was screaming, I know he was looking. He was licking before long, too.
Too much information.
You wanted me to get the truth.
Try to show some respect.
Look, honey, the truth isn't always pretty.
You're being crude and disgusting.
Shush! Anyway, I just shaved my private parts in a beautiful design. I wanted someone to see it besides you.
That's disgusting.
Your dad sure liked it. He sure did.
I get what I want. Sometimes that involves more than just you.
I need the family. I need everybody on my side. That's the way I roll, honey. Accept it.
ATL stop, because I want to see you and I want to see life. Riding in your car, oh please don't drop me off, because it's not right on the step, running no more. Double-decker bus crashes into us. To die by your side is such a heaven's way to die. And with a 10-ton truck, girls all over. To die by your side with the